The sun rose over the busy city, spilling golden light over tall buildings and crowded streets. Inside Carterville Bank, the air smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, and the sound of clicking keyboards filled the room. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, but something was about to happen that would change the fate of the bank forever. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a gentle, elderly woman with warm brown eyes, walked slowly through the tall glass doors. She wore a neatly pressed dress, her gray hair tied back in a bun, and she held a small brown handbag close to her side. Her steps were slow but steady, each one echoing softly against the marble floor. She had come to deposit a check her son had sent her. Nothing unusual, nothing that would draw attention. She joined the line of customers waiting for their turn. People shifted impatiently, scrolling through their phones, but Evelyn stood quietly, a faint smile on her lips. She had always believed in patience, in kindness, in treating others with respect. Little did she know, the man who would serve her today had none of those values. At the far end of the bank, behind a wide desk, the branch manager, Mr. Graham, sat in a black leather chair. He was in his early 50s, with thinning hair, sharp eyes, and a cold expression that made people nervous. He looked over the line, his gaze landing on Evelyn. And something about her, maybe her old-fashioned clothes, maybe her gentle way, made him frown. He leaned over to the teller next to him and whispered something, making the younger man chuckle under his breath. Finally, it was Evelyn's turn. She stepped forward, handing over her ID card and the check with a polite "Good morning." Mr. Graham barely glanced at her. He took the ID, held it in his hand for a moment, and then, with a careless flick, let it fall to the floor. It landed face down on the cold marble tiles. "You dropped this," Evelyn said softly, bending down to pick it up, but before her hand could reach it, Graham smirked and said, "No, ma'am, you dropped it, not me." His voice carried a hint of mockery, the kind that slices deeper than a shout. The customers nearby fell silent, some pretending not to notice, others staring in quiet shock. Evelyn picked up her ID without complaint, but her heart felt heavy. This wasn't the first time she'd been treated this way, but it never got easier. The transaction went on in silence, the manager's tone sharp and impatient. When it was done, Evelyn thanked him anyway, turned, and walked toward the door, her dignity intact. Her back was straight, but deep inside, a storm of hurt was forming. She had not told anyone yet, but her son Marcus Carter was one of the richest men in the country, and this bank was days away from sealing a $5 billion corporate deal with his company. Carter Global, in the far corner, a young bank employee named Claire, had seen the entire exchange. Claire was in her 20s, new to the job, and still believed. In fairness, her stomach twisted with anger as she watched her manager treat the old woman so cruelly. She wanted to speak up, but she knew what happened to employees who questioned him. They didn't last long in the job. Outside, Evelyn walked into the warm sunlight. Trying to shake off the sting of humiliation, she had lived a long life, seen many kinds of people, and learned that respect could not be demanded. It had to be given. She wondered if she should tell Marcus, but she didn't want to trouble him. Her son already had enough on his plate, running a global empire, meeting with presidents, and negotiating billion-dollar deals. That evening, in her cozy kitchen, Evelyn sat down for tea. The phone rang, and when she answered, her son's deep voice came through. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. How was your day?" he asked warmly. Evelyn hesitated, glancing at the teacup in her hands. She could have lied, told him everything was fine, but something in his tone made her speak the truth. "Well, son," she began slowly, "something happened at the bank today." Marcus listened in silence as she told the story, her voice steady but soft. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end. "Mom," Marcus finally said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel, I want you to go back to that bank tomorrow." Evelyn frowned, confused. "Why?" "You'll see," Marcus replied, and then hung up. That night, Evelyn lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know what her son had planned, but she knew one thing. Marcus was not a man who let disrespect go unanswered. And tomorrow, the bank manager who dropped her ID on the floor was going to learn exactly who she was. The next morning, the city was already awake, cars honking, people rushing to work, and the smell of fresh bread drifting from a bakery near the bank. Inside Carterville Bank, Claire sat at her desk, typing slowly, her mind replaying the scene from yesterday. She had barely slept. The image of the elderly woman's hurt expression burned into her thoughts. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still see Mr. Graham's smug face. The ID card lying on the cold floor, it bothered her deeply, because Claire believed her job was more than numbers and paperwork. It was about treating people with respect. Mr. Graham arrived late, as he often did. Wearing his tailored suit and expensive watch, he carried himself like a man untouchable. The kind who believed rules were for everyone but him. He passed Claire without a greeting, only glancing at her screen to make sure she was working. Then he walked straight into his office, shutting the glass door behind him. Claire sighed, wondering if she should tell someone higher up what happened. But then she remembered what happened to David, the last employee who complained. One day he spoke up about Graham's behavior toward a customer, and the next week he was let go without explanation. Claire needed this job. Her rent depended on it. Her little brother's school fees depended on it. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something that might change everything across the city. Evelyn sat in her living room, dressed neatly once again. Her son, Marcus, had called early that morning to confirm his instructions. "Just go about your business, Mom," he had said, his tone firm but calm. "I'll take care of the rest." Evelyn wasn't sure what he meant, but she trusted him. She had seen Marcus fight through impossible odds to build his company from scratch. If he said he would handle something, he always did, by mid-morning. Evelyn was walking toward the bank again, her small handbag in hand. She pushed open the glass doors, feeling the cool air wash over her, almost instantly. Claire spotted her and felt her heart skip a beat. She quickly got up from her desk, moving toward the counter, hoping to be the one to help her this time, but Mr. Graham stepped out of his office. Fake smile plastered on his face. "Good morning," he said in a tone that was polite on the surface, but empty underneath. Evelyn returned the greeting softly, handing him her ID once again. Claire held her breath, silently praying he wouldn't repeat yesterday's cruelty, but her hope vanished in seconds. Graham looked at the ID, then deliberately let it slip from his fingers. It fell to the floor once more. "Careful, ma'am," he said with a smirk. "You keep dropping this." A few customers nearby turned to look, sensing the tension. Claire didn't think twice. She stepped forward, picked up the ID, and handed it back to Evelyn. "Here you go, ma'am," she said gently, her voice firm. Her eyes locking on Graham's in quiet defiance. For a moment, the air between them felt heavy. Graham's smile faltered, and his eyes narrowed. But he said nothing. Evelyn smiled warmly at Claire, grateful for her kindness. She didn't know that at that very moment, her son was just outside the bank. Watching everything through the glass doors, Marcus stood tall, his tailored suit fitting perfectly, his presence commanding attention even before he entered. He had come with a purpose, not to shout, not to threaten, but to observe. And what he had just witnessed was all the proof he needed. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. Heads turned immediately. Some employees recognized him, others only felt the shift in the atmosphere. Graham's eyes widened slightly, his voice suddenly warm and eager. "Mr. Carter." "What an honor," he said, rushing forward with an outstretched hand. Marcus shook it briefly, his expression unreadable. "I thought I'd stop by before finalizing our company's agreement with your bank. Marcus said evenly, "I want to see how you treat your customers, after all. Customer service is the foundation of trust." Graham chuckled nervously. Of course. We pride ourselves on excellent service." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharp. "Good," he said. "Then please, don't let me interrupt. Carry on as normal." He stepped aside, positioning himself in the corner like a silent observer. Graham's smile froze in place, his hands twitching slightly. Claire, still standing by the counter, realized something important. This was not a casual visit. She could see the way Marcus's eyes followed every movement, the way he glanced between Evelyn and Graham. She didn't know the full connection yet, but she could feel the pieces starting to fall into place. Evelyn completed her transaction, her dignity intact. But now she knew something Graham didn't. Her son was watching, and the man who had humiliated her twice was about to find out exactly who she was. The doors of Carterville Bank opened with a smooth whisper as Marcus Carter stepped inside. Every step he took was calm, measured, and full of quiet authority. His dark, tailored suit seemed almost to absorb the morning light, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. He didn't need to raise his voice or announce his name. The weight of his presence alone made people turn their heads. The few employees who recognized him instantly stiffened. Marcus Carter wasn't just any client. He was the CEO of Carter Global, one of the most powerful companies in the country. And in less than a week, the bank was supposed to finalize a $5 billion corporate deal with him. It was the kind of deal that could raise a bank's status for decades. But Marcus wasn't here to talk about interest rates or investments. From across the room, Graham spotted him, and his face lit up in what looked like genuine warmth, though Marcus could see right through it. "Mr. Carter." "Welcome, sir," Graham said. Striding over quickly, he extended a hand, his fake smile wide, his voice dripping with forced charm. Marcus shook it briefly, his eyes cold. "I wanted to stop by before we move forward with our agreement," Marcus said evenly. "I believe the way a bank treats its customers says more than any contract ever could." "Oh, absolutely," Graham replied with an eager nod. "We pride ourselves on excellent customer service here." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharp enough to make Graham's confidence waver. "Good," Marcus said quietly. "Then I'll observe a little." He stepped aside, moving toward the corner of the room, his tall frame leaning casually against the wall. To anyone else, it might have seemed like he was just relaxing. But his eyes missed nothing. Evelyn, still standing at the counter with Claire, caught sight of her son. Her lips curved into a small smile, not because she wanted to embarrass Graham, but because she trusted her son to handle this with grace. Claire, meanwhile, felt a strange mix of curiosity and tension. She had a feeling she was standing in the middle of something much bigger than she understood. Graham, however, was already sweating. He knew this was an important client. But he had no idea that Evelyn, the elderly woman he had treated with contempt twice, was Marcus's mother instead. He straightened his tie and tried to act as though he had nothing to hide. Marcus's deep voice carried softly across the room. "Mr. Graham, I'd like to see how you treat ordinary customers." Graham forced a laugh. "Of course, sir. All of our customers are important to us." But even as he said the words, his tone felt empty, hollow. A new customer walked in, a man in dusty work clothes with grease on his hands. Graham barely gave him a glance and directed him curtly to a different counter. Marcus's gaze sharpened, making a mental note. Then, as if on cue, Evelyn stepped forward again, handing Graham her ID for a small withdrawal. And there it was, the same careless flick of the fingers. The ID slipped to the floor, the same smirk, the same mocking tone. "Careful, ma'am," Graham said again. "You really need to hold on to this." But this time, Marcus moved. His footsteps were unhurried but purposeful as he crossed the floor. He stopped beside his mother, his tall frame casting a shadow. Over the counter, bending down, Marcus picked up the ID himself, wiping it gently with his thumb before handing it to Evelyn. "Here you go, Mom," he said quietly, his voice low but carrying across the room like a sudden wave. The entire bank froze. Graham's mouth opened slightly, his smile vanishing in an instant. "Mom?" he repeated, his voice weak. Marcus straightened slowly, turning his gaze on the manager. "Yes," he said calmly. "My mother, the woman you've humiliated twice." The silence was so deep, even the soft hum of the air conditioning felt loud. Claire's eyes widened in shock, her hands frozen on the counter. The customers nearby shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others watching with open fascination. Marcus didn't raise his voice. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. "I came here to see your service culture, Mr. Graham," he said. "And I have," Graham stammered. "Mr. Carter." I didn't know that's the problem," Marcus interrupted softly. "You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect." His words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Evelyn stood quietly beside him, her dignity untouched, her presence more powerful than any accusation. Marcus turned to her and offered his arm. "Come, Mom," he said. "We're done here for now." The two of them walked toward the exit, the glass doors opening slowly before them. Every pair of eyes in the bank followed their steps, and though Graham stood frozen behind the counter, he knew deep down that the $5 billion deal slipping away from his grasp was not just a possibility, it was almost certain. But Marcus wasn't finished. No, this was only the beginning, and tomorrow the lesson would be made public for everyone to see. The next morning, Marcus Carter sat in his office at the top floor of Carter Global's headquarters. The city stretched out beneath him, tall buildings gleaming in the early light. On his desk lay a folder containing all the details of his company's pending $5 billion deal with Carterville Bank. His pen rested beside the papers, untouched. He could have signed them that very moment. But after what happened to his mother, he had no intention of letting this go quietly. He wanted a lesson to be learned, not just for Graham, but for everyone who thought respect was optional. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes fixed on the skyline, thinking through every step of his plan. If Graham's behavior was this bad when he didn't know who someone was, it meant he treated many others the same way. Marcus didn't just want to call him out. He wanted to make sure it happened in front of people who mattered. By mid-morning, Evelyn was dressed and ready, wearing the same neat dress she had worn the past 2 visits to the bank. When Marcus arrived at her home to pick her up, she looked at him curiously. "Are you sure about this, son?" she asked softly. "Mom," Marcus said with a small smile. "Today we're going to give him a chance, the kind of chance he never gave you." When they reached the bank, Marcus didn't go in immediately. Instead, he walked his mother to the door, then stepped aside and said, "Go in just like before. Act normal." Evelyn hesitated for only a moment before pushing open the glass doors, her handbag clutched gently in both hands. Inside, Claire was behind the counter again, arranging paperwork neatly. She spotted Evelyn right away, and her heart tightened. She knew what was coming. From his office, Graham saw Evelyn as well, and his expression shifted from fake charm to annoyance in an instant. Still, he stepped forward to the counter with a tight smile. "What can I do for you today?" he asked, his tone polite on the surface but empty beneath. Evelyn handed over her ID, saying she needed to withdraw a small amount. Graham took it, and with deliberate carelessness, let it fall to the floor again. It landed face down just as it had before. "Careful, ma'am," he said, smirking faintly. "You really ought to hold on to this, but this time?" Claire didn't let the silence swallow the moment. She stepped forward, scooped up the ID, and handed it back to Evelyn with a firm, "Here you go, ma'am." Her eyes flicked toward Graham, silently telling him she had seen enough of this behavior. It was then that Marcus stepped through the doors, the sound of his footsteps drawing the attention of everyone inside. Graham turned instantly, his smile snapping into place. "Mr. Carter, good to see you again," he said. Marcus gave a polite nod and said, "Perfect timing. I wanted to see your customer service in action." Without giving Graham a chance to respond, Marcus looked around the bank. "I think today would be a good day to meet your whole team. Could you call them together?" Graham's smile twitched, but he nodded, quickly summoning the staff from their stations. Claire, the tellers, the back office workers all stood in a loose circle, curious and uneasy. Marcus placed a hand on his mother's shoulder and guided her to stand beside him. "I asked my mother to visit your bank these last few days," Marcus began, his voice calm but carrying through the room. "I wanted to see how you treat people when you don't know who they are." Graham swallowed hard, glancing around at the other employees. A few of them exchanged uneasy looks. Already guessing where this was going, Marcus continued, "Twice now, in front of witnesses, you took her ID card and dropped it to the floor. Twice, you spoke to her with disrespect. And twice, you did this while claiming your bank prides itself on excellent service." The silence in the room was so heavy, it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Graham opened his mouth, but Marcus raised a hand slightly, stopping him. "I am not here to humiliate you in private," Marcus said. "I am here to make sure your entire staff sees that behavior like this is unacceptable." The room stayed frozen, every eye fixed on Marcus. The truth hung there, undeniable. Evelyn stood quietly, her presence dignified and steady. Claire's chest swelled with quiet pride. Finally, someone powerful was standing up to the man she'd been afraid to challenge. Marcus turned toward the employees. "This is not about money," he said firmly. "This is about dignity, respect, and the kind of service you give to every single person who walks through your doors." He glanced at Graham one last time, his voice dropping slightly. "And as for the $5 billion deal your bank was counting on, I'll be reconsidering where that money goes." The words hit like a thunderclap. Graham's face went pale, his confident mask cracking completely. Around the room, the staff shifted uneasily, some looking away, others staring at him in open judgment. Marcus turned to his mother, offering his arm. "Let's go, Mom," he said. They walked out together, leaving behind a room full of shocked faces and one bank manager who knew his career had just been put on the edge of a cliff. But Marcus's plan wasn't finished yet. The next move would make sure the consequences spread far beyond the walls of that bank. The glass doors of Carterville Bank closed behind Marcus and Evelyn, but the tension they left behind lingered like a heavy cloud. Inside, the staff whispered in low voices, some glancing nervously toward Graham, who stood frozen at the counter. His face pale, he tried to compose himself, telling himself he could smooth this over. After all, he was the branch manager, and managers always found a way to protect themselves. But Marcus Carter was not an ordinary client, and he was certainly not a man who would let this kind of insult vanish quietly. A few hours later, in a sleek conference room at Carter Global's headquarters, Marcus sat across from the regional director of the bank. The director, a tall man named Richard Palmer, had been summoned without explanation. He arrived, smiling politely, but the smile faded the moment Marcus began to speak. "Richard," Marcus said evenly, "I called you here because your branch manager has made it impossible for me to move forward with our deal." Palmer frowned. "What happened?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened a folder and slid a small USB drive across the table. "That," Marcus said, "contains security footage from the last 3 days at your Carterville branch, including 2 separate occasions, where your manager publicly disrespected my mother." Palmer blinked. "Your mother?" Marcus nodded, his voice still calm. Yes, Evelyn Carter, the elderly woman whose ID he dropped to the floor twice. Palmer's expression tightened as he glanced at the drive. "I'll review it immediately," he said. "But surely we can resolve this without—" "No," Marcus interrupted, his tone sharpening. "You don't get to brush this aside. Your manager's behavior is not an accident. It's a habit. I will not allow my company's name to be associated with an institution that treats people that way." Palmer shifted in his seat, realizing this was bigger than a complaint. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on the director. "I am giving you a choice," Marcus said. "Either you take immediate action against your manager and publicly commit to better training and policies, or I take my $5 billion investment elsewhere and I make sure the public knows exactly why." Palmer swallowed hard. "Mr. Carter, are you threatening to go public with this?" Marcus didn't blink. "I'm promising it." Later that afternoon, Palmer was on the phone with the bank's CEO, explaining the situation. The CEO's voice on the other end was sharp and urgent. "Get him out of there immediately," the CEO said. "We cannot afford this kind of scandal." Back at the branch, Graham was in his office, pacing nervously. He had heard nothing from upper management yet, but his instincts told him something was coming. When the call finally came, his stomach dropped. "Graham." "This is Richard Palmer," the voice said. "You're suspended effective immediately. Clean out your desk." The news spread quickly among the staff. Claire, hearing it from one of the tellers, felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. For years, Graham had walked around like an untouchable king. Now, with one act of disrespect caught by the wrong person, his entire career was crumbling. But Marcus wasn't done that evening. He sat in front of the cameras at a press conference, reporters from major news outlets filling the room. Evelyn sat quietly beside him, her posture straight, her expression calm. Marcus spoke into the microphones, his voice clear and steady. "Yesterday, I witnessed firsthand how my mother, a valued customer, was treated at a bank I was about to invest in," he began. "She was spoken to with disrespect. Her identification was deliberately dropped to the floor twice, and no apology was ever given." Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously. "I came here today to say this. No amount of money can make up for the lack of basic human respect. You cannot treat every customer, rich or poor, with dignity. Then you do not deserve their business," Marcus said firmly. He announced that his $5 billion deal with Carterville Bank was officially canceled. Instead, the investment would go to another institution with a proven track record of community care and equal treatment. Gasps rippled through the room. This was no small decision. For the bank, it meant a huge financial and reputational loss for Graham. It meant his name would now be associated with one of the most public professional humiliations in years. When the press conference ended, reporters swarmed Evelyn, asking her how she felt. She smiled gently and said, "I raised my son to stand up for what's right. I'm proud of him." Marcus placed a protective arm around her and guided her toward the exit. The flashes of cameras followed them until they stepped into the waiting car. Across the city, Carterville Bank's headquarters was in crisis mode. Calls from shareholders, customers, and even politicians were flooding in. Social media was ablaze with clips from the press conference, the footage from the bank's cameras showing Graham's dismissive smirk as he dropped Evelyn's ID had already gone viral. And the public's reaction was swift and unforgiving by nightfall. Graham's name was trending online for all the wrong reasons. His inbox was full of hate mail, and his phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters. The man who had once thought himself untouchable was now scrambling to hide from the world, but for Marcus and Evelyn, the storm outside felt far away. They sat together in Evelyn's cozy kitchen, sipping tea. Marcus smiled faintly. "It's not about the money, Mom," he said. "It's about making sure people like him. Think twice before treating anyone that way again." Evelyn nodded, her eyes warm. That's worth more than $5 billion. Son, she said softly. By the next morning, the story had spread far beyond the city. Every news channel was running the footage of Graham dropping Evelyn's ID. Talk. Shows were replaying Marcus's press conference, calling it a powerful stand for respect on social media. Millions were sharing clips with captions like "Dignity over dollars," and "This is how you use power for good." Carterville Bank was in full crisis mode. Their public relations team was working non-stop trying to calm the outrage. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The hashtag respect costs nothing was trending worldwide. Former customers were lining up online to share their own bad experiences at different branches. Each story added more fuel to the fire. Inside the bank's headquarters, senior executives were holding emergency meetings. The $5 billion loss was bad enough, but the public humiliation was even worse. Investors were pulling out, and the bank's stock price had dropped sharply overnight. Richard Palmer, the regional director, was receiving calls from board members demanding answers. The first question was always the same: how did this happen? At the Carterville branch, the atmosphere was completely different from just a few days ago. Without Graham's looming presence, the staff moved more freely. Some looked relieved. Others anxious about what would come next. Claire, who had witnessed everything from the beginning, noticed that customers seemed more relaxed now. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served. At least in part. Graham, meanwhile, was holed up in his apartment. His phone had not stopped buzzing since the video went viral. Friends, old colleagues, and even distant relatives were calling, some to offer sympathy, others to scold him. Reporters camped outside his building, shouting questions whenever he appeared. He had once strutted through the bank with pride, but now he avoided leaving his home at all. Marcus, however, wasn't thinking about Graham anymore. His focus was on the next step, ensuring that his mother's experience would lead to real change. He began speaking with leaders from several banks, asking pointed questions about their training and policies. He wanted to place his investment somewhere that not only offered good service, but also valued kindness. At the same time, Marcus received hundreds of messages from strangers thanking him. Some were from elderly customers who had been treated badly in the past. Others were from employees who had lost jobs for standing up to abusive managers. Each message reminded Marcus that this wasn't just about one man in one branch. It was about a culture that needed to change. Evelyn kept a quieter perspective. She appreciated the messages and the attention, but she still lived simply. Her days were filled with tending her small garden, knitting, and spending time with friends. When people stopped her in the street to thank her, she smiled warmly and told them the truth. "All I did was be myself. My son did the rest." Claire's life was also beginning to change. A week after the press conference, she received a call from Carter Global's HR department. They told her Marcus wanted to offer her a position in his company. The role came with better pay, better benefits, and, most importantly, a work environment where respect was part of the culture. Claire accepted without hesitation, knowing she was stepping into a new chapter of her life back at the Carterville Bank branch. A new interim manager arrived. His first order of business was to hold a meeting with all employees. He spoke plainly. The events of last week should never have happened. From this day forward, respect is not optional here. It's a requirement. Some employees nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable. Change was never easy, but everyone knew it was necessary. Meanwhile, Graham's suspension turned into a permanent dismissal. The bank issued a brief public statement confirming that he was no longer employed and that they were reviewing internal practices. It did little to repair their reputation. The public had already made up its mind. For many, Marcus's decision to walk away from the deal was a symbol of integrity. People admired him not for his wealth, but for using it to send a message. One evening, Marcus visited his mother again. they sat together at her kitchen table, the warm smell of her homemade soup filling the air. "You know, Mom," Marcus said with a faint smile, "I think we made a lot of people think twice about how they treat others." Evelyn reached over and patted his hand. "You made them think." "Son," she said gently, "I just stood there and let the truth show itself." The night was calm outside, the world still buzzing with their story. Marcus knew the headlines would fade eventually, but the impact would remain. Some people would remember Carter Global as the company that walked away from billions to protect dignity. Others would remember Evelyn, the quiet woman who carried herself with grace even when someone tried to take it away. And for Marcus, that was enough, because sometimes the real victory wasn't in winning a deal, it was in proving that respect was worth more than money. A week after the press conference, the world had started to move on to other news. But for the people directly touched by the events at Carterville Bank, the change was lasting. The branch was quieter now, its atmosphere different without the weight of Graham's arrogance hanging over it. Customers were greeted with genuine smiles, and Claire noticed more thank yous being exchanged at the counters. It was as if the shadow that once covered the place had finally lifted. For Marcus and Evelyn, life had returned to its familiar rhythm. Evelyn tended to her garden in the mornings, trimming flowers and humming softly to herself. Marcus was back at work, negotiating deals, traveling for meetings, and managing his empire. But every so often, a letter or email would arrive from a stranger, thanking him for what he had done. He always read them carefully, feeling humbled that one act of defense for his mother had inspired so many. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus visited his mother with a small box in his hands. She was sitting on the porch, enjoying the gentle breeze. "What's this, son?" she asked as he handed it to her. "Open it," Marcus said with a smile. Inside the box was a small silver plaque, engraved with the words, "Respect costs nothing, but means everything." In honor of Evelyn Carter, Evelyn's eyes shimmered as she ran her fingers over the words. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's a reminder." Marcus said softly, "For me, for my company, and for anyone who visits my office, that no matter how busy we get, no matter how much money is on the table, people come first." That evening, they had dinner together, the warmth of the food matched by the warmth of their conversation. Evelyn asked him if he regretted walking away from the $5 billion deal. Marcus shook his head. "Not for a second. Money can be earned again, but once you lose your integrity, you don't get it back the following week." Marcus's words reached further than he expected. An international business magazine published a feature on him titled "The CEO Who Put Dignity Before Dollars." It wasn't just about the scandal, it was about leadership, values, and the rare choice to do the right thing when no one could force you to. The article was shared widely, inspiring conversations in boardrooms, schools, and even churches. Claire, now working at Carter Global, was thriving in her new role. She had been assigned to a team that focused on community outreach. One of their projects involved visiting schools to teach young people about customer service, respect, and workplace values. Claire often told the story of Evelyn, careful to keep the details respectful, and every time she told it, the students listened closely. They understood that it wasn't about wealth or status, it was about how you chose to treat the person standing in front of you. As for Graham, he had disappeared from the banking world. Rumors said he had moved to another city, trying to find work in a smaller company. But his name was still attached to the viral footage, and it followed him wherever he went. For some, it was a harsh punishment, but for Marcus, it was simply the natural consequence of his choices. Evelyn had never spoken ill of him in public. She didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. Months later, Marcus was invited to speak at a leadership conference. The audience was filled with executives, entrepreneurs, and young professionals hoping to learn from his success. He began his speech not by talking about profits or strategies, but by telling the story of his mother at the bank. He described her patience, her dignity, and how a simple act of disrespect had nearly been hidden in the noise of daily business. But I couldn't let it slide, Marcus told them, because how you treat the least powerful person in the room says more about you than how you treat the most powerful. The audience was silent as he continued. Respect costs nothing, he said. But when you give it, you give someone the feeling that they matter. And when you take it away, you take something from them that money can't replace. When the conference ended, people lined up to shake his hand. Some told him they planned to take his message back to their companies. Others simply said, "Thank you," that night. Marcus drove back to his mother's house. She was waiting for him, with tea ready. As she always did, they sat together in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet spaces between their words. "You've been busy," Evelyn said with a smile, "changing the world one lesson at a time." Marcus chuckled. Maybe just reminding people of what they already know, but forget too easily. As the evening deepened, the two of them shared stories, laughed, and enjoyed the peace of being together outside. The world kept moving. Deals were signed, headlines changed, people hurried on with their lives. But somewhere, in the minds of those who had heard their story, a small seed had been planted. A reminder that respect wasn't just good manners, it was the foundation of every lasting relationship. And as Marcus left his mother's house that night, he knew this truth would outlive the scandal, the headlines, and even the $5 billion deal. Because while money could open doors, respect opened hearts.